All right. You ready to dive into this Intel thing? You know, all those articles you sent over?
Yeah.
About the shakeup? Let me tell you, things are getting really interesting over there at Intel. You know, at Chip Giant Central. We're going to unpack why their longtime CEO just made a sudden exit and what it could mean for the future of the company.
Yeah.
And maybe even, you know, your next laptop or smartphone.
What's really interesting is that this wasn't like a planned retirement. Pat Gelsinger, after almost 40 years at Intel, is stepping down as CEO effective December 1st, 2024.
Oh, wow.
That's just a few weeks away.
Yeah.
And the board is scrambling to find a permanent replacement.
Yeah, the timing definitely raises some eyebrows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the press release from Intel, you know, they're trying to put a positive spin on things, thanking Gelsinger for his service. But you're right, there are hints of trouble brewing beneath the surface. They mention a challenging year and the need to restore investor confidence.
Right.
Which doesn't exactly scream smooth sailing.
Precisely. When a company uses that kind of language, it often signals that internal pressure was mounting. Gelsinger had a vision for turning Intel around.
Right.
But it seems like the board wasn't seeing the results quickly enough.
So who's steering the ship while they search for new captain?
They've appointed David Zinsner, the current CFO, and Michelle Johnston Holthouse, who they just named CEO of Intel Products, as interim co-CEOs. Frank Yeary, the independent chair of the board, is also stepping up as interim executive chair to help manage the transition. It sounds like they're trying to project stability, but you can bet there's a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering happening right now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And while they search for a permanent CEO, they've laid out some priorities in that press release. Things like focusing on product leadership, doubling down on their manufacturing capabilities, and of course, driving efficiency and profitability. Frank Yeary is quoted as saying, "We know first and foremost that we must put our product group at the center of all we do." What do you make of that statement?
Well, it's interesting because it seems to acknowledge that Intel may have lost sight of what made them successful in the first place, creating innovative products that people actually want to use. They've been so focused on reclaiming their manufacturing dominance that they might have neglected the product side of the equation.
And that manufacturing dominance is proving to be a tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
Intel is still trying to catch up to TSMC, the Taiwanese company that's become the world leader in chip manufacturing.
That's right. TSMC has consistently been ahead of the curve in terms of process technology. The techniques they use to create ever smaller and more powerful chips. Intel has stumbled in that area, which is why they've fallen behind. And to make matters even more complex, they're also trying to establish themselves as a major foundry, a company that manufactures chips designed by other companies. It's a risky strategy. But it could pay off big time if they can pull it off.
So they're trying to juggle product leadership, manufacturing dominance, and this whole foundry ambition. That's a lot to have on their plate, especially during a leadership transition. No wonder the board seems a little antsy.
Absolutely.
And speaking of antsy, we should talk about that Bloomberg article you sent over. The analysts quoted in there are suggesting that this CEO shakeup could lead to some pretty drastic changes at Intel.
That's right.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. They're talking about everything from selling off divisions to a complete company split. What are some of the scenarios they're outlining?
One of the most dramatic possibilities is splitting Intel into two separate companies. One focused on designing chips, and the other focused on manufacturing them.
Hold on, splitting Intel in half, that sounds pretty radical.
Would be a huge move, no question. But some analysts believe it could be the key to unlocking value for shareholders. Right now, Intel's stock price reflects the performance of both their design and manufacturing operations. But if they were separate entities, investors might be willing to pay a premium for a pure-play chip design company unburdened by the complexities and costs of running massive factories.
Interesting. So theoretically, two smaller, more focused Intels could be worth more than one big Intel.
That's the idea. And then there's the foundry side of the equation. A standalone Intel manufacturing operation could potentially attract a much wider range of customers. Think about it. If you're a rival to Intel, like AMD or NVIDIA, would you feel comfortable handing over your chip designs to them for manufacturing?
Yeah, be like letting your rival peek under the hood, wouldn't it?
Exactly. But if the foundry were a separate, independent entity, it might alleviate those concerns and open up new business opportunities for Intel.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic here. But splitting a company as large and complex as Intel wouldn't be easy. What kind of challenges would they face?
You're right. It would be a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
They'd have to figure out how to divide their assets, personnel, and intellectual property. They need to establish new systems and processes for the two separate entities to interact with each other. And they'd have to do it all while minimizing disruption to their existing business. It's a daunting prospect, to say the least.
So splitting Intel is a bold move. With potential upsides, but also significant risks.
That's right.
What are some of the other scenarios the Bloomberg article mentions?
Well, there's the possibility of a suitor coming along and acquiring the entire company. Qualcomm has expressed interest in the past. But the sheer size and complexity of Intel might make that a difficult deal to pull off.
Qualcomm buying Intel. That would be a seismic shift in the tech world.
No doubt. And it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Would regulators approve such a massive merger?
Right.
Could Qualcomm successfully integrate Intel's operations into their own?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating possibility, but it's far from certain.
Okay, so we've got splitting the company and selling the whole thing.
Right.
What else is on the table?
Another possibility is that Intel might seek a strategic investment from a private equity firm. There were rumors earlier this year that Apollo Global Management was considering such a move, but the talks stalled.
So a private equity firm could inject some much-needed cash.
Right.
And maybe push for some changes without taking over the whole company.
Exactly. It's another way for Intel to gain some breathing room.
Right.
And potentially accelerate their turnaround efforts.
Okay, so we've covered splitting up, selling off, and bringing in an investor.
Yeah.
What other options are they considering?
One more to mention is Intel potentially selling off more of its stake in Mobileye.
You remember Mobileye?
Yeah.
The self-driving tech company they acquired and took public a couple of years ago.
Right.
They still own a majority stake.
Okay.
And they could decide to offload some of that to generate cash and streamline their portfolio.
So they could cash in on Mobileye's success and refocus on their core chip business.
That's one way to look at it. It would send a signal to the market that they're serious about making changes and prioritizing their core competencies.
Wow. That's a lot to digest. Intel is clearly at a crossroads. And the decisions they make in the coming months will have major implications.
Right.
Not just for the company itself, but for the entire tech industry.
Absolutely. And for you, the listener, this means the availability and cost of your favorite gadgets could be affected by how this all plays out.
Before we get too deep into those implications, let's take a moment to really grasp the magnitude of what a potential split could mean for Intel and the semiconductor industry as a whole.
That's where we'll pick up when we come back. Stay with us.
Yeah. So picking up where we left off, let's unpack what a split Intel could really look like. It's a concept with, massive implications, not just for the company, but potentially for the entire semiconductor landscape.
I have to admit, the more we talk about it, the more intriguing this idea of splitting Intel becomes.
Right.
But it's still hard to wrap my head around what it would actually look like in practice.
Imagine two separate companies emerging from the current Intel. On one side, you'd have this powerhouse of product design. This entity would retain the iconic Intel brand, all their cutting-edge designs for CPUs, and a treasure trove of valuable intellectual property.
So essentially, the brains behind the chips, but without the actual manufacturing muscle.
Precisely. Their focus would be on developing the next generation of processors, pushing the boundaries of performance and efficiency. But instead of manufacturing these chips themselves, they would outsource that crucial step to, potentially their former selves.
You mean the other half of this split Intel? The manufacturing side?
Exactly. This other entity would become a pure-play foundry. Meaning they'd be dedicated to manufacturing chips designed by other companies. And yes, that could include their former sibling, the Intel Product Design Company.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the potential synergy here.
Yeah.
But why would Intel even consider such a radical move? It seems like it would create a lot of complexity.
It certainly would.
Yeah.
But there are compelling reasons behind this idea.
Okay.
For starters, it could unlock a significant amount of value for shareholders.
Right.
Right now, Intel's stock price is weighed down by the performance of both their design and manufacturing businesses. But investors might be willing to pay a premium for a dedicated chip design company, free from the burdens of running massive, expensive factories.
So splitting them up could actually make each piece more valuable than the whole.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating concept.
That's the theory. And then there's the foundry side of the equation.
Right.
A standalone Intel manufacturing operation could attract a much wider range of customers.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
You're a rival to Intel, like AMD or NVIDIA. Would you feel comfortable handing over your chip designs to them for manufacturing?
I wouldn't want to give my competitor that kind of insight into my technology.
Exactly. But if the foundry is a separate, independent entity,
right,
it creates a different dynamic. It could become a trusted partner for a wider range of companies, fostering more competition and innovation in the chip industry as a whole.
And by focusing solely on manufacturing,
right,
the foundry could potentially streamline its operations, become more efficient, and ultimately offer more competitive pricing.
Precisely. That increased efficiency and competitiveness could be a game changer,
right,
especially as demand for chips continues to skyrocket.
Yeah.
Remember, we're talking about everything from smartphones and laptops to data centers and artificial intelligence. They all rely on these tiny but powerful chips.
Okay, so we've talked about some potential upsides for Intel and its investors,
right,
and maybe even for the industry as a whole. But what about the downsides? Splitting up a company like Intel has to come with some serious risks.
Of course. There are some significant challenges
right,
and potential pitfalls to consider.
Yeah.
One of the biggest concerns is the sheer complexity of disentangling two businesses that have been intertwined for decades.
Right.
Intel has built an integrated model where design and manufacturing work hand in hand. Separating them would be a logistical nightmare, requiring meticulous planning and execution.
It's like trying to separate two trees that have grown together, their roots completely intertwined.
Yeah.
It could be messy and potentially damaging.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the financial aspect. Splitting a company isn't cheap. You're talking about significant costs associated with restructuring, legal fees, setting up new systems, and potentially even severance packages if there are layoffs.
And then there's the human element.
Yeah.
Splitting a company can create a lot of uncertainty and anxiety for employees. They might worry about their jobs,
right,
their roles in the new structure,
yeah,
and the future of their careers.
You're raising a crucial point. A successful split would require clear communication,
right,
strong leadership, and a lot of reassurance for employees throughout the process.
So a split is a gamble.
Yeah.
With potential rewards, but also some serious risks.
That's right.
What about those other scenarios we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Would acquiring Intel or investing in it be any less complex?
They would certainly present their own unique sets of challenges. Let's start with the idea of Qualcomm acquiring all of Intel.
Right.
It would be a massive undertaking, even for a company as large as Qualcomm. They would need to carefully assess Intel's operations, identify areas of overlap and potential synergy, and come up with a plan to integrate two very different corporate cultures.
And let's not forget the regulatory hurdles.
Right.
A merger of that size would face intense scrutiny from antitrust authorities. Who would want to make sure it wouldn't stifle competition in the chip industry?
You're absolutely right. And then there's the question of whether Qualcomm would even want to acquire all of Intel.
Right.
They might be more interested in specific parts of the business, like the product design division or certain manufacturing assets.
So a partial acquisition is also a possibility.
Right.
That makes sense. And what about that private equity scenario?
Yeah.
What would an investment from a firm like Apollo look like?
A private equity investment could provide Intel with a significant cash infusion, allowing them to invest in new technologies, expand their manufacturing capacity, or even make strategic acquisitions of their own. But it would also come with strings attached.
Meaning Apollo would likely want to say in how Intel is run.
Yeah.
They'd probably push for changes to boost profitability and increase the value of their investment.
Exactly. They might push for cost-cutting measures, asset sales, or even a change in leadership.
Right.
So while an investment could provide Intel with some much-needed resources, It could also lead to some significant changes in how the company is managed and operated.
Okay, so we've got a range of potential scenarios here.
Yeah.
Each with its own set of complexities and potential outcomes. But one thing that really strikes me is that these decisions won't just impact Intel and its investors.
Right.
They'll have ripple effects throughout the entire tech ecosystem.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Intel is a foundational company in the tech world.
Right.
They're not just making chips. They're shaping the future of computing. What happens to Intel will inevitably impact the availability, performance, and cost of the technology we all rely on every day.
So what does this all mean for the average person who uses tech every day?
Yeah.
What should they be watching for as this story unfolds?
Well, one of the key things to pay attention to is how these decisions might affect the price and performance of your favorite gadgets. Yeah. If Intel splits up and its manufacturing arm becomes more efficient and competitive, it could lead to lower prices and more choices for consumers.
So we might see cheaper laptops, smartphones, and other devices.
Right.
That would be a welcome development.
It's certainly a possibility. And if increased competition drives innovation on the product design side, we could see even more powerful and feature-rich devices hitting the market.
That's the exciting part of this story, isn't it?
Yeah.
The potential for these changes to spark a new wave of innovation in the tech world.
Absolutely. But there are also potential downsides to consider. Okay. For example, if Intel struggles to execute its split, or a potential acquisition goes wrong, it could lead to disruptions in the supply chain and higher prices for consumers.
So there's a chance that those cheaper laptops and smartphones might actually become more expensive in the short term.
It's a possibility. Especially if there are any hiccups along the way.
Right.
And then there's the question of jobs.
Yeah.
Any major restructuring at Intel could lead to job losses.
Right.
Which would have a ripple effect throughout the economy.
It's a complex situation with a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
But it's also a fascinating case study in the evolution of the tech industry. What started as a leadership transition at Intel has opened up a Pandora's box of possibilities, each with the potential to reshape the technological landscape.
That's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about business. It's about the future of technology and its impact on our lives.
And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, we need to address the elephant in the room. What does this all mean for Intel's future as a leader in the chip industry? Can they regain their dominance? Or are they destined to become a cautionary tale of a tech giant that failed to adapt?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And we'll tackle it head-on when we return. Stay tuned.
All right. Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into this whole Intel situation. We've gone over a lot from, the surprise exit of their CEO to the possibility of a company split.
Right.
Something that could reshape like the whole chip industry. But the big question is, what does it all mean for Intel's future as like a tech leader?
Yeah.
Can they actually reclaim their crown, or are they headed for a decline?
That's the big question, isn't it? Intel's been a dominant force in computing for decades.
Right.
But like you've talked about, they face some serious challenges in recent years. They've struggled to keep pace with TSMC in manufacturing, and competition and chip design has become, fiercer than ever.
And now they're in the middle of this leadership transition and facing some potentially radical changes, like strategically. It's a lot for any company to handle.
Yeah.
Let alone, one that's trying to maintain its position at the top of the tech world.
Right.
So let's break it down. What are Intel's chances of emerging from all this turmoil as a revitalized leader?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom, right?
No.
Intel still has some powerful assets in its arsenal.
Yep.
They've got, a vast library of intellectual property, a deep bench of talented engineers, and a global manufacturing footprint that few companies can match.
Not to mention, the Intel brand still carries a lot of weight,
Oh, absolutely.
For a lot of people, it's synonymous with computing power and innovation.
Exactly. But to really leverage those strengths effectively, they'll need to make some smart decisions and execute them flawlessly. The new CEO will need to have a clear vision for the future and the ability to rally, the troops around that vision.
So it's not just about having the right resources. It's about leadership, strategy, and execution.
Precisely. And the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
If Intel can navigate this transition successfully, They have the potential to not only maintain their position, but potentially even expand their influence in the tech world.
But if they falter,
yeah,
if they make the wrong bets or fail to execute their plans, the consequences could be really severe.
Absolutely. They could lose market share to rivals like AMD and NVIDIA, see their stock price continue to decline, and ultimately become a shadow of their former selves.
So it's a make-or-break moment for Intel, a defining chapter in their history.
You could say that the decisions they make in the coming months and years will determine whether they remain like a tech titan or become a cautionary tale of a company that failed to adapt to a changing landscape.
Okay, so what are some key things to watch for as this story unfolds?
Yeah.
What'll be the telltale signs of whether Intel is on the path to recovery or decline?
First and foremost, pay close attention to who they choose as their new CEO.
Right.
Their background, experience, and vision for the company will be like crucial indicators of the direction they intend to take.
And then, of course, we'll need to see what strategic moves they make. Will they, double down on Gelsinger's plan to reclaim manufacturing leadership? Or will they chart like a whole new course entirely?
Right.
Will they embrace the idea of a split, or will they pursue other options like strategic acquisitions or divestitures?
Those are all critical questions. And beyond, the big strategic moves, keep an eye on their product roadmap. Are they continuing to innovate and release new products that capture the imagination of consumers and businesses?
Right.
Or are they falling behind in the race to deliver the next generation of computing experiences?
And what about their financial performance?
Yeah.
Are they able to improve their profitability?
Right.
And, demonstrate to investors that they're on a sustainable path to growth? Or are they continuing to struggle with declining margins and mounting costs?
These are all, key metrics to watch.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, keep an eye on the morale and energy within the company.
Okay.
Are employees energized and excited about the future, or are they, demoralized and uncertain about what lies ahead?
It's amazing to think that what started as a leadership change at one company has turned into this, sprawling saga with so many potential ramifications.
It really speaks to the, interconnected nature of the tech world.
Right.
And the outsized influence that a company like Intel has on the entire ecosystem.
And it's a reminder that even the most dominant companies aren't immune to disruption. The tech landscape is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And companies that fail to adapt risk, being left behind.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Intel shakeup, what's the final takeaway for you, the listener?
I think the key takeaway is that we're witnessing a pivotal moment, in the evolution of the chip industry. And the decisions made by Intel and its competitors in the coming, months and years will shape the future of computing, for all of us.
Yeah.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep an eye on the unfolding story of Intel.
It's a story that's far from over.
Right.
And as we've seen, it's full of twists and turns and unexpected developments.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure. It's a story that matters.
Absolutely.
Not just for, the tech world, but for anyone who uses technology in their daily lives.
That's right.
And that's pretty much all of us. So until our next deep dive, stay curious, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to ask, the big questions.
Yeah.
Who knows, you might just uncover the next big tech story.